Welcome to the Life is Relationships podcast, where we share biblical truths about marriage, parenting, and discipleship. The desire of CTCI is to see the hearts of individuals and families restored in their relationship to the Father, and for them to be empowered to have thriving, godly relationships that impact the communities around them. I'm your host, AJ Selby, and on today's episode, Larry Pons will be joining us, and we'll be talking about what it looks like to put healthy boundaries in place on how to handle conflict before those potentially explosive situations come up. Take a listen. Well, hey, Larry, how are you doing today? Thank you so much for coming on.
It's wonderful being here, AJ. It's good to see you.
Today, we're going to be talking about boundaries, more so in direct correlation to conflict and what healthy boundaries look like.
Great question. Great question. And I answer it by asking a question.
Okay.
And that question is, what would happen if God didn't put boundaries on the ocean? What would you think? I mean, most people would answer chaos and destruction.
Yeah.
And that's what happens. There's a scripture that I know very well. It's Proverbs 8:29. It says, when he set for the sea its boundary, so that the water would not transgress his command. And when he marked the foundations of the earth, God established boundaries. There's a reason for it. And I think the same principle applies to our relationships. Boundaries need to be established before we get into a hard discussion, so that we don't transgress that boundary that would create unnecessary hurtfulness in that relationship. You see, I think agreeing to a behavioral restriction to work through disagreement can save a couple from going to a place of no return. And many of us find ourselves getting into deeper and deeper into situations only because we didn't set boundaries. If we can treat each other civilly, if we can work on things in a right way, many of our conflicts will be resolved very quickly and civilly. But um, trying to resolve a conflict in the middle of a crisis is like trying to put money in the bank when you've gone through a catastrophe. You don't. You're supposed to take money out of the bank, not put it in during a crisis. You have to have something there. So when you get into a hurtful discussion or a serious discussion with your spouse, something has to be in place before you can have that discussion. Let me give you an example. We knew a wonderful couple that would they set a boundary, and when they got into a serious discussion, if one of them felt that it was going to go too far and they were going to be hurtful, they had the right to stick out their hand. And when they stuck out their hand, the other one immediately had to put their hand in that hand, and they would stop and pray. What a genius idea. I mean, that was so simple. But the boundary is that they were getting ready to hurt each other or say something, and they didn't want to do that. And before God, they would just stop and pray. Now, I will say that Susan and I tried that. It didn't work. I mean, she thought I was reaching my hand out to do so. I'm sitting there going, no. That was not our way of doing it. But so we came up with other methods. And I remember one time she came to me and she said these words. She said, Larry, I need to talk to you about something. And as a husband, when your wife does that, you know it's going to be something, and she's preparing you. But she said these words. She said, would you just pray about it before you give me an answer? I said, that's reasonable. I can do that. And so she started talking, and she got through a couple sentences, and I reacted. It was probably about money. I mean, that's where I reacted. And she's all of a sudden she just stopped. She said, you know what? You didn't do what you said you were going to do. So I'm not going to talk with you right now. And she just turned around and walked off. And I'm sitting there going, I said something really brilliant, like, that's not fair bringing God into these kind of situations. How stupid is that? Well, that was she was establishing a boundary for us. She knew my reaction. She knew how I was going to respond. And she was saying, would you please do this before you respond? So it's very simple. Boundaries are not something complicated, but couples need to learn to do that when things are okay and talk through it at that level rather than waiting till the crisis and trying to establish a boundary. It does not take place. It's already chaos and destruction are already there.
It blows my mind every time I have heard you talk about this because it really is such a simple concept to plan ahead on how to navigate and manage these kinds of conversations.
No, every couple, every person wants to make sure that they can handle things rightly. No one wants to lead into an argument or a fight. And if you do, then there's other problems.
Right.
But most people, most couples really want to work something out if they can learn to talk about it before a serious matter comes. Say, hey, this is the way we ought to handle this. I'm going to commit myself not to get angry. If I do, I will remove myself for 5 minutes and we'll come back and finish the conversation rather than just getting angry, storming out of the room and leaving it unresolved. There's where most couples go. But a boundary keeps you from doing it because it's a prior commitment to be a Christian, act like a Christian, and treat each other like a Christian. That's all we're doing is allowing ourselves and committing that we're going to be a Christian as we handle this. And God comes in.
Yeah. Well, Larry, thank you so much for it's a very short, sweet, and simple principle to very simply agree on the ground rules for how you are going to conduct yourself and have these conversations.
I've said it many times. It's simple. Doesn't mean it's easy,
Yeah.
but it's very simple. We've complicated it. Establish boundaries, and you will be glad.
Awesome. Larry, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to today's episode. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and we would love if you left us a review. For more information about CTCI and our upcoming programs, be sure to check out ctcilife.org. This podcast is a production of Christian Training Center International. It is produced by AJ Selby, Rebecca Wall, and Seth Stradling. It is edited, mixed, and mastered by AJ Selby.